today continues as we move through the Gospel of Mark in this year in the lectionary cycle. We read this rather strange story that appears early in Jesus' ministry. Then Jesus went home, and the crowd came together again so that Jesus and his disciples could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain Jesus, for people were saying, "He's gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons he casts out demons." And Jesus called them to him and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan is risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand. But his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly, I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they had said, 'He has an unclean spirit.'" Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between bring healing into our world. Amen. I am currently finishing up an amazing book by Tara Westover titled Educated. It is a memoir and a New York Times bestseller. It is something of a modern-day Horatio Alger story, as it traces the author's life from its very beginnings in Idaho. Westover grew up in a fundamentalist Mormon home, where there was a great distrust of formal education. But she managed, despite that, to end up with a PhD from Cambridge University. Her father, in particular, held to many conspiracy theories. He was a survivalist who stockpiled weapons and foodstuffs in preparation for the coming apocalypse, what he called the days of abomination. He frequently spoke of how neither the government nor the medical establishment nor the educational establishment could be trusted. Most everyone, he felt, was ultimately out to get true believers like himself. And the world, he said, was full of traps set by the devil to trip folks up and pull them away from the faith. So it was that aside from church, they lived a largely self-reliant life on a mountainside in rural Idaho, going into the nearby small town as infrequently as possible. When Tara was 11, she longed for a chance to meet other children her age. And so she managed to scrape together enough money, babysitting and doing other odd jobs, to pay for dance lessons, which were being offered in the back of the only gas station in town. Tara was raised to believe that a girl or a woman must never show her legs above the ankle. So the fact that the other girls wore leotards and tights was a bit of a shock, especially when held up against the jeans, sweatshirt, and steel-toed boots she wore to her first class. When she confided in her mother about the situation, her mother secretly drove her 40 miles to a shop that sold dancewear and bought her tights, a leotard, and dance shoes. She instructed Tara to keep the outfit hidden in her room, out of the sight of her father. Late that fall, plans were made for a Christmas recital. Originally, the girls were to wear standard recital sort of gear. But knowing Tara would not be allowed to do that, her teacher arranged for a rather odd costume of a very oversized gray sweatshirt adorned with glittery Santas. Tara and her mother had not told her father about the recital, but the night of the event he found out and he decided to attend, since, after all, it was being held at the church. Needless to say, he was less than pleased. On the way home that night, he raged on and on. The class, he insisted, was one of Satan's deceptions. It claimed to teach dance, but instead it taught immodesty and promiscuity. Satan is shrewd, he said. By calling it dance, he has convinced good Mormons to accept the sight of their daughters jumping about like whores in the Lord's house. I share this rather shocking story before we dive into our reading from Mark to make sure we don't simply dismiss talk of the devil as being outdated, anachronistic, or irrelevant to modern life. For the reality is, whether you and I believe in the devil as a personal being or not, there are many, many people who do. Certainly, Jesus probably did. In our story today, Jesus has been making the rounds, healing the sick, preaching the good news of God's love, great love for all people, and even casting out demons. He's creating quite a stir, and the religious authorities of his day are increasingly concerned about all the attention he is attracting. They are no doubt afraid that Rome will take notice and come in and violently shut things down. They had done it before. There's no reason to think they might not do it again. Even his own family is concerned. They have no interest in seeing Jesus get caught up in some sort of Roman dragnet. So they too seek to stop him and drag him back home. It is a real point of crisis in his ministry. One of the truly disheartening things about the story is the way the religious authorities try to stop the man from Nazareth. They accuse him of working for the devil. In fact, they accuse him of being possessed. He has Beelzebul, they say, and by the ruler of the demons, he casts out demons. Beelzebul was just one of the many names used to speak of Satan at that time. Literally, it means Lord of the Flies. Hardly a complimentary term. Jesus, they are saying, is using demonic power to cast out demons. As Eugene Peterson translates, they were spreading rumors that he was working black magic, using devil tricks to impress the people with his spiritual powers. How can that be, asks Jesus. How can Satan be opposed to Satan without destroying himself? Against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, the house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. And for the time, his parable, his speaking works. His critics are silenced. Even his family members go off and leave him. But it is not the end of the matter. And in time, it will lead to new accusations, new times of name-calling, and eventually it will lead to his death. For you see, that is what happens when we start to fling around words like demonic. That's what happens when we start to use terms like satanic. That's what happens when we accuse someone else of doing the devil's work. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not naive. There are times when real evil is afoot. There are times when women and men do indeed commit acts that are not simply reprehensible, but seemingly of the devil. There is real evil in the world. But any time we deny another person's humanity by suggesting that they are pure evil, we are only adding fuel to the fires of hell, if you will. We are not moving towards a resolution of the problem. We are instead accentuating the growing, wide divide in our nation and in our world. And quite frankly, that is one of my chief concerns in this time of such great polarization in our nation. When I hear Muslims being accused of falling prey to satanic powers, when I hear Mohammed being called the devil, I shudder. When I am told our president or Nancy Pelosi or any other political leader is evil incarnate, I quake. When I see folks of differing sexual orientations and gender identities being labeled as fallen human beings, I am appalled. When someone labels the efforts of Planned Parenthood as the work of the devil, when I hear people speak of the NRA the same way, I know we aren't going to get very far in that conversation. I know that the House will continue to be divided. If we truly want to work towards healing the great rift, the great divide that is paralyzing our nation in so many ways, we must begin by setting aside the labels. Especially those labels which imply evil forces behind our control are at work in the lives of those we consider enemies. Flip Wilson may have been joking when he said, "The devil made me do it." But when we say that of our opponents, it is no laughing matter. So what are we to do? How can we deal with those people that seem to be promoting agendas we feel are contrary to that which is right and good? How can we combat the brokenness we find on all sides, all around us? How can we deal with the inequities, the injustices, the wrongs that seem to be everywhere? First and foremost, we can refuse, absolutely refuse, to participate in the name-calling, the labeling, the oversimplification that comes whenever we speak of someone in the ways that the religious leaders spoke of Jesus. We're already moving into what promises to be a highly charged political season. We will encounter many folks who will refuse to see any good in the opposition. But you and I can vow to take a different approach. You and I can refuse, just plain refuse, to demonize those with whom we disagree. We can focus instead on the issues, on the real concerns that confront us as a society. We can speak in measured tones, in thoughtful ways about immigration, about abortion, about gun control. We can acknowledge that people of good faith and genuine concern are on both sides, all sides, of any given issue. They may be wrong, but they are still human beings loved by God. We can work for good outcomes for all those involved. All of which, of course, is hard. Very, very hard. There are times when I sit before the news and watch and want to simply jump out of my seat and label that person I'm listening to. But what good will it do? Nothing. There are times when I am in conversation with people who I radically disagree with, who I want to call a fool. But what good will that do? None of what we hope to have happen in our world, no healing of this rift will occur unless we are first willing to see the other person as a fellow human being. And this is the hard part. Even if he or she doesn't see us as fully human. Love your enemies, said Jesus. Tara Westover, spoiler alert, does indeed manage to survive the labeling and name-calling, the demonizing that so dominated her childhood. She survived it, but her family did not. In time, she and two of her siblings got to the point where they were and are totally estranged from her parents, while four of her siblings remained tied to them in so many ways. And the three never communicate with the four. The Westover family is truly a house divided. And it has in many, many ways fallen. Let that be a lesson for all of us. If we wish to remain united as a nation, we must find new ways to look at one another, new ways to speak about each other, new ways to talk together. Tara Westover's father saw dance as the work of the devil, but perhaps dance can provide us another way to think about all this. Do you remember that first high school dance?